So it's, as I said, an enormous privilege and honor to have Erin here. She is a Brooklyn-based artist who got her her BFA in 2007 from the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and in 2009 a MFA from Tyler School of Art. Her work, as you will have seen upstairs, deals a great deal with female bodies, women's issues, including questions of violence, of bodily functions, of sexuality and nudity. It is really an amazing body of work. She is known for these hand-woven tapestries using hand-dyed yarn. And I have to say that it was one of the things that really attracted us to your work, was this idea of this intersection of a very time consuming ancient technique being used to represent these images that perhaps we see as throwaway, and then the way you tie them into questions of the current day and our lives and our bodies. So thank you again for the honor of your loan. Thank you for being here, and we're just terribly excited to have you here and to listen to you tonight. So thank you, Erin. Whoops.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And if you have any questions, feel free to jump in at any point. My name is Erin M, and I'm a tapestry weaver, and this is the piece that's 2 floors up. But I will come back to it. So the work that I'm going to show you is starting, I've been thinking a lot about the sort of past 10 years of work. So this is sort of the most, or the sort of beginning of me weaving myself. So this is a piece called No Means No ? Which is a self-portrait of marks on my body that I received without my consent. So it was kind of the first moment that I started to document myself in this way that was self-reflective. And it before I started to weave my tattoos. So I wasn't yet marking my self-portraits with my tattoos. And then these are the colors off. But these are some self-portraits talking about grooming, but also self-harm. So there's a lot of my work sort of blurs that line between the one on the shaving one is called 4 a.m. hookup prep, which is kind of this idea of like running really quickly to engage with somebody. But then this idea of like harming yourself for beauty. And then the piece with the tweezers is the beginning, which is reflective of a piece that I just made for my show at PPOW, which talks about trichotillomania and dermatillomania, which is a skin picking and tweezing, hair pulling disorder. So, but it's a much more pretty version of that. And this is my work. There's usually figures, objects, and landscapes. So this is kind of the beginning of me doing a combination, which is also looping back around now. These are like sort of all of the objects that have been left from relationships, the things left behind. So I'm not really like a person who keeps things, but these are all sort of mementos from like relationships or travels, or just like the random things, like a random tampon that's in your jewelry box for no reason. But and then this is, so all of my work is hand woven by me, using yarn that's, a lot of the yarn I use is production excess yarn, so it's basically the trash of the rug industry, and I dye it and wind it into balls, and it's all hand woven on floor looms so there's an image behind the warp. So this is the Freeze booth with PPOW, and Portia Munchin and Betty Tompkins in the back, and just showing scale. And so my work is sort of always, I've been doing these shows where like my work, there's a selfie of me nude, but then there's also this sort of remnants of violence or bodily functions. And the text is from this person who was a stalker of mine. It was a really like violent interaction. So for me, I've like always been determined to embrace sexuality, embrace the freedom in your body, but also not shy away from the fact that like violence is occurring, but to not let it dim your sexuality. So the way I sort of hung this work is reflective of that. And then this is another time lapse. There's a few of these, but it just sort of shows that the sort of tactility of the work. It's all hand woven. I use slit woven work, and it's just fun to see the images build up. So this is an image of there was famous celebrities were dealing with a domestic violence situation, and it was like constantly in the news, as these things are constantly in the news. And I was thinking about how like trauma is sold and fodder for entertainment. So, and how that sort of reflects on who comes forward and like, sort of rethinking the narrative that will occur if you tell your stories. So, and these are documents of court cases or just like police records. And so this one has mohair. So the domestic violence case stamp is all mohair. So it's like a texture. And then these are more sort of thinking about memory and sexuality, and these sort of playful moments of childhood and secrets. Same with this one. This is a lady slipper, and it just sort of comes with a memory of being given a lady slipper as a young girl and having to sort of fend with this idea of like being thankful for the male attention that you don't actually want. And meanwhile, lady slippers were like, we weren't allowed to pick them where I was growing up. So there was this multiple levels of like my anger of having to accept affection. And then these are, I've been doing car crashes for a long time. And there's a Thelma and Louise screenshot. And then there was a famous murder in Boston where the husband set up his pregnant wife to be murdered. And I think there's this like level of safetiness and like desirability and perfection, or the image of perfection, and death and trauma, and sort of like how those things affect you. And this is a screenshot, or these are multiple screenshots of the Larry Nassar case. So this is Ali Raisman, who was famous in her pink blazer and amazing in her testimony. So this piece lives in Milwaukee at an arts hotel, which is amazing. So it's in the public, for the public to see. And then this piece is from a screenshot from the Nicole Brown Simpson and O.J. Simpson 911, the language from the 911. And this is a rape kit. And so the piece, I wove the piece, and then I sort of stained it, which is just talking about the idea that like rape kits are rotting in police storage. So they're sort of being left to disintegrate with the evidence. And so this piece has been stained after I wove it. And another car crash. when I grew up, there was a lot of car crashes and drunk driving accidents. So I think about that a lot. And more, I always think about like the language, like the domestic violence and simple assault, standard domestic relationship incident, like this idea that you're sort of simplifying such complicated situations. And then this piece is from the TV show Intervention. So I grew up in a household where there was a lot of addiction, and I think the language "I'm scared to death" is like such a poignant moment in one of the episodes, which is like loving somebody who is in active addiction or in recovery is like the scariest thing sometimes. So my work is a lot about self-portraiture, but in many ways, like the self is, or as Sarah Lucas says, my self-portraits are very much about relationships, about being with somebody else, and about looking at or playing with somebody else. They are me, but being me is always about being with others. A life takes a lot of people, which I think is like such a perfect way to talk about the self-portrait. Because for me, it's like my body and a lot of my work, even the piece upstairs, Desire, the name comes from a text that I got from somebody talking about how they had moved on, but they were left with this desire, and it was sort of my problem to not be desirable or something, illicitly desirable. And this is the mirror. So the mirror is this mirror that I've had since I was a kid, and I've had it, it was covered in sort of nail polish and all sorts of things when I was a little kid, and then it's moved with me throughout my adulthood. So this one is a very large self-portrait. And then another one of, in 2018 I went to Yaddo, and I was able to meet with some family that I didn't really know, and I learned about my great-grandmother's murder, and I was given like a lot of the documents of the newspaper. So this is the headline from her. She was shot, and then she died days later in the hospital. So this piece was just collected with the the Purchase Prize. So it's in the Tang in Saratoga Springs, which is great because it's like right by where this happened. And so for me, like learning about this trauma on the sort of female side, there's like I think about, or have always thought about, like the male perspective of violence towards the women in my family, but thinking about like the violence that's been held by the women or sort of received, and how that was passed down. So and then there's like the bubble gum is a very long story, but and then the sort of the 4-leaf or the 3-leaf clover is something that I was given as a child, but I'm pretty sure it's the wrong thing. Like I'm pretty sure this was for one of my sisters, and I had a cross, but it's a dispute, a family dispute about what was the truth. But I think like in families that's the idea of like what's actually true. You're sort of, okay, you have to sort of believe. And so that piece is called Believe Me. So it's like this idea of like having to believe the truth, but sort of knowing as a kid that like your experience is actually the truth. And then this piece is called An Accident, which the color is much more subtle, but it's a bruised hand. And so this piece was sort of the catalyst for my last show as well. A very simple piece. And then this is a piece of sort of memory of a family fight where dinner was thrown out the window and there was just sort of this trash on the side of the road. So there's images of me as a kid, and then there's just sort of like references to the condom. Like when I was growing up, I grew up on Cape Cod, and so like there were always condoms at the beach, and I think there was just like this idea of like sex is this thing, like the Louise Bourgeois piece upstairs, it sort of hints at this sexuality, but you're sort of not sure, and like the adults get a little weird, and so you're sort of left with these objects that are imbued with like curiosity and like, but they're just gross, so I like including them. And these are more detailed shots. So these are from my high school journals, which to me are also self-portraiture. These are me like really spending time with an object and sort of, reaching out to the world with text. And then this is my computer screen. So it's like an image or a video that I had sent to somebody, and like me sort of reminiscing. And then me also doing research about domestic violence and watching The Affair and looking at Seamless, and my student loan tab is open, and there's also the suicide lifeline tab. So there's like this idea that like sexuality is one note, but for me, I think like a lot of people are holding many things all at once, while also trying to be safe and comfortable in their body. And this piece, webcam 2, I think, is, right now it's at the Aldridge in their 52 artist show. And it's just me hanging out. I'm not masturbating, which a lot of people say I am, but I'm just covering myself because I was alone. This was during COVID, and I was just with my computer trying to sort of remind myself that I existed. And similar thing with this too. It was me really trying to sort of, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this idea of like, if you're single, you're gonna be single forever because like sex is over and you're never gonna be touched. And for me, I was like trying to sort of flex these muscles of early sexuality with the webcam, of trying to remember that I was a person. And so this is the desire piece. Similarly, like, and I was thinking like a lot of these pieces where my head is gone, like my mental health was pretty terrible, and I think there's something to think about, like you can sort of pose sexuality and pose sexiness, but like hiding your head is a really easy way of like avoiding the fact that you're kind of not there. And same with this one. This piece is called Depression, which is like that sort of posing and like trying to activate yourself when you just can't really. Another reflection. So this mirror shows up a lot, and it's in a piece that I'm weaving right now. So yeah, this one's called I Wish You Were Here. I don't know. Reaching. This is another reflections. This is in a hotel room in Seoul, and I was thinking there was like this article talking about how a lot of women were being photographed without their consent, and being exploited like on the internet, and how, especially in Seoul, like sexuality is very contained, and it was really scary for these people, and that is a very scary thing. But I was in this hotel room, and just sort of existing with myself and being allowed to photograph myself, and that sort of freedom there is in that. And so this piece is called Why Now, which is what my mother said to me, sort of as I've been making a lot of the work that I've been making. She's kind of not stoked on me talking about a lot of things. So that was sort of something she said in a conversation. So this piece is called Why Now, which is me burning an image of me as a child with Barbies, and then there's like images of me as a child on the ground. And then, so that was sort of the pivotal. This is me at Bemis Center, and this is the sort of start to the works that I've been making recently. So this piece is called Budding, which is me laying over this couch, and like Ariel, which is like as a early sort of queer kid, not really knowing. Ariel was like very imbued with curiosity, and I always picked these hydrangeas. I had a stepmom for like 3 months who had these hydrangea bushes, and I would take them apart as this like really angry kid. So these pieces were the beginning of the work that I've been making lately, which is these like conglomerations. It's like all of it. It's like trauma, sexuality, and selfies. And this piece has like a 35 millimeter, a flip phone selfie, and an iPhone selfie, which is like quintessential timeline. And then this piece has the, early childhood. That was like the first bikini I ever had. And then documents and references to the bar my mom met my stepdad at. And this is a piece, I think this is the last piece in the slideshow. This is The Hidden Crisis, which is about domestic violence, sort of early childhood trauma, and all of the things, right, I've been thinking about. So, and this, it says desire. Oh, it's like the perfect, I didn't even mean that. But yeah, this is the text that I got, which said desire in all these words. And so it was like, ugh. Anyways, yeah, that's the end.
Oh, thanks, Selena. Hi. My question is, I guess, a little bit about your process. How did you arrive at weaving, and were you making, what came first, this representational figurative approach of art making, or weaving, or was that at the same time? Because it also looks like you have a facility for draftsmanship, so I'm also curious if you were a painter prior to becoming a weaver, if you were always interested. And then I guess part two is, are you intending to make a relationship between the history of weaving and textile as a quote woman's art?
Yeah, so I'm forgetting the beginning. I've always liked sewing and doing things that are very repetitive and like very addicting, I guess you would say. So I did go into art school thinking I would be a painter or a fashion designer, because I didn't know fibers existed. It was like this middle ground. And I don't like selling things or like making trends, so I wasn't doing fashion. So I learned about weaving and tapestry, and so one of the first and only times I've been to a museum with my mother, she touched a tapestry, which is not good. We got kicked out of the museum, and it was like really embarrassing, but it was also like really, like I was pissed too, because I was like I love, like, you want to touch tapestry. It's like it's like, it's a natural thing to want to do. And so I was learning tapestry, and I was like, I'm just gonna make the tapestries that I'm not gonna make the bourgeois like tapestry thing. I'll make the things that people can relate to. So, yeah, and I think like for the women's work thing, I think in many ways like there's this idea of, I don't really relate to that, but I do think there's this new sort of understanding of temperament that like a lot of tapestry artists I know have a lot of patience, but only for weaving, right? And it's like they aren't patient people. They aren't like, but it's like an obsessiveness, or like there's a lot of, it rewards you. The medium rewards you. You see progress and you see logic, and so I think it's like a temperament thing rather than a gender thing. Oh, yeah. No, I get that too. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can speak up. I don't need a mic. I was just wondering about the size of your pieces. Do you have like a preference of size that you work in? Because I see in the videos they seem quite large.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that the scale of your pieces relates to the themes in which you work?
Yeah, I got my big loom in 2015, so there was like multiple years of me saying like I really want to work big, and lately I've been working really big, and it's been good. But I do think there's this level. I've been thinking a lot about like work that is the body scale and like smaller work. So I think it just depends on what it is, right? So yeah, I don't think. I am looking forward to seeing these pieces installed and like sort of the physical journey you have to do to experience the work. But yeah, physically it's really hard to make work this big, so I don't think it's super sustainable. So, anyone else? Mm-hmm.
I have two questions. First one's simple. Basically, how long does it take you to make a piece?
Mm-hmm. Oh, they range from like a week to 6 weeks.
And my second question is the relationship of your choices of tattoos
Mm-hmm.
and the narratives that you weave.
Mm-hmm.
Is there specific kinds of relationships between the imagery that you choose to adorn your body and a narrative that goes along with that, or is it something disconnected from the overall narrative you use in your tapestries?
Yeah, I think they're pretty disconnected, except the one that says Weaver. And then I do have like a unicorn tapestry reference, but yeah, I think they're pretty separate. My tattoos are sort of this like, I think I would have made way better choices if I knew I was going to be weaving them later in life. But that's not something you can do. And but yeah, I think for me, like a lot of with the tattoos, they show time, right? So there's like pieces, or there's early images of me that don't have certain tattoos, and there's this like progression of time, which I really like, love that idea. So.
And how do you choose the images for the tattoos?
They're more like random, or I don't know. I got a truck, so I got a truck tattoo. I have a tattoo that my stepdad has, like just like sort of random decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That way, yeah, here.
Observe that the facelessness of violence enhances the violence and somehow reflects upon it as a woman. And I wonder if you want to address that at all. I mean, I was very moved by a face with no features. And I wonder if that's part of how violence starts, or the person performing it doesn't see the eyes, shall we say.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm using images that aren't mine in some of them, and so I want to talk about like the idea. I don't want to remove their specifics, but I want to talk about this. Like when I'm reading about something, I'm also thinking about my own, which I think is like empathy. You know, you think about how you also experience things. So. Yeah, but it's also like less about implicating, right? It's like less about like reiterating that they are this victim, survivor, like experiencing something and sort of self-identifying is one thing, but for me to co-opt that and put them in a narrative and like they lose power in that situation. They aren't sort of consenting to me taking it, and so I try to sort of blur. I don't use, like, I've talked with Raisman, so like I sort of feel comfortable using her name, and she's so iconic in that depiction. So But with the other ones, I don't really like name the person. It's more about the idea that like somebody's trauma has been sold as entertainment, and how awful that is. So.
It seems like you have, it seems like you have a duality in your work between public and private. There are moments that seem more evocative of your childhood, and then there are moments that are raising consciousness about things like domestic violence and no means no, and all those critically important things that we're all grappling with. And I was wondering, there is still nakedness in them, and I was wondering how you feel about nakedness generally, and do tattoos feel like you're permanently clothed?
Yeah, maybe. There's a little bit of protection there. But I like, growing up, you know, like a lot of how I learned about sexuality was through the lens of trauma, and I never wanted to grow up and have abusers control my sexuality. And so I was like determined to be comfortable and to send nudes and take pictures and have sex and not be scared. Obviously, fear exists, and I have experienced awful things, but I was determined to not have that control me. So I think with a lot of those things, it's like the sort of even the playing to sexiness, or like the trying to engage those muscle memory, or those like just sort of soft moments in life, is like important as an even if it's not sort of a engage with another person, right? It's like when you're, I think maybe it's not like a modern thing, but to sort of, you know, look at yourself in the mirror, or, you know, taking pictures, I guess, is more of a modern thing. But I think like, yeah, wearing nice underwear, or just like having those moments by yourself is something that's important. So.
Well, self-portraiture is, you know, that is like really old. That's like forever. But there's this nice kind of very deliberate, naked militancy in your work that I really admire and am fascinated by, because it seems like you're taking a stance and you're holding on to your sexuality, and you're holding on to being able to be who you want to be, and you're holding on to needing to talk about it and protest what else is going on. So it's really fascinating bunch of things that sort of collide in your work.
Yeah, I have always talked about a lot of things, and I think that's important. Like, I've always done these sort of like upstairs, like the selfie pieces, but for me, like, those pieces are so much more than just, you know, like a nude. It can be a nude, but it's also like a moment, or a relationship, you know. So.
Yeah, I think they're very sensuous. Like some of them are I don't mean this in a like titillating way, but they're provocatively sensuous, and I do not mean that as titillation. I mean that is the way that art will bring something up and offer it to you without really remarking on it. It holds more than one thing in a really fascinating way. So, congratulations.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So, yeah.
Hi, sorry, I was just wondering how to like phrase this. I think you seem to combine like the real with the surreal, and or use realistic things to kind of make something surreal, especially with like the general figures and the tattoos and the clothes, and without a face. How do you prioritize like sort of which is which in your pieces? If that's
that's interesting. I was thinking recently about, in high school, like we were learning about Dali, and my teacher kept saying phallic, and I had no idea what phallic meant. So I like was the nerd who like raised their hand and asked what phallic meant. So, but I've been thinking about surrealism as it relates to like memory, and like what is real and what is sort of this like trip or glitch in both visual memory but literal memory. And so for me, I think like a lot of things I was telling somebody recently, like a lot of things can exist at once, right? And so I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. So like this is like two versions of the same, or sort of two versions, like of a window being smashed, but then like the window being boarded up, but it's like a different version of it's like a house. So I think, and then there's this door frame thing, which is happening a lot, and this sort of trying to be small. Yeah, I'm figuring that out, I think, right now. Surreal. Or like this environmental thing. Yeah, that's all. I think we're good.
I have two questions. Okay. One is about the car crashes. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's such a heavy history of that, Warhol. And so I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit more about the subject of Warhol and of car crashes, and if there is a reference to Warhol. And then my second question is something we've noticed with the show upstairs, is that people really love the show upstairs, and they keep saying it's such a nice show, and we keep thinking, yeah, it's also such a political show. And so I'm interested in how you perceive the perception of your work due to this kind of dichotomy between the form and the content. If you play with that one way or the other, those are my two questions. So essentially about the car crashes and the form versus content.
Yeah, so when I was in college, I was thinking about like the sort of pivotal moments that like of trauma that sort of change how people. This was before I knew a lot of things. So when I was the first funeral I ever went to was for 4 people. It was a drunk driving accident, and it changed a lot, right? But I also think it didn't change a lot. Like I think it just sort of felt like that was what changed a lot. I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things. I wasn't allowed to have friends who I had to drive to their house. Like my sisters had friends in the neighborhood, so they could walk to their houses. I didn't have a friend in the neighborhood, so I made art instead of having friends. And so there was this, car crashes to me were always like my sisters were heavy drinkers. They both have crashed a lot of cars. They've had boyfriends who've died in car crashes. It's just like kind of an ongoing thing. It's like I've never drank because I chose as a young person to like be the designated driver. And so like I think in many ways it's like what trauma does to a person, which lane they choose after. Do they become like hypervigilant, or do they sort of which is a trauma response in itself, despite it being like this hyper-perfectionism. And like, so I was always fascinated with what trauma does to people within a family structure. And learning about Warhol in art school, it was like kind of the opposite of what I was trying to do, right? He's like talking about desensitization, and I'm trying to think about like sensitization. Like I want us to see things and not talk about them. So and with tapestry, it's a slowing down versus a speeding up. And so like I think a lot of his, like the really violent work is really beautiful, but I think his notion of speed and like consumption is like kind of opposite of how I was thinking. So yeah. And then what was the second one? So I think with tapestry, like something happens with the simplifying of images, and wool or textiles in general are like a softer material. So I don't know what it is, but there is this sort of softening in multiple levels of imagery that makes it sort of less aggressive in ways. Yeah, I've made work that's like very violent, but I feel like because it is soft and, you know, if there is any air, there's like this movement. And so there's this like, it's not so, I don't know, there's, textiles does something, it's like magical. It like has this embodiment and this energy that's different than other work, so. I don't know. Yeah. Thanks for coming, asking questions.